It's no coincidence that this two-fist bow matches perfectly the shape of this bridge. The Gongchen Bridge, as its name in Chinese implies, was a show of reverence to the emperor whose wish to build this canal gave rise to this ancient water city Hangzhou. The Gongchen Bridge, used by its residents on either side of the canal for over hundreds of years, marks the origin of this colossal waterway project that stretches for thousands of kilometers. And our journey today along this Grand Canal starts right here. First built in 1631 during the Ming Dynasty, this 90-meter-long, 16-meter-high bridge was one of the city's most recognizable landmarks at the time. Once a main port to Hangzhou, it greeted sailors on their return home. On the west bank of the bridge, a traditional commercial street has been restored. The street, now lined with traditional two-story buildings, was once the most vibrant market in the city. Docks, tea houses, and grocery stores were packed with people coming from different places. The man-made river, first known as the Jiangnan or Han Canal, has been the lifeline of the city since the 5th century BC, even before the formation of the Grand Canal, as explained one local archaeologist.
We can trace
the origin of the canal in Hangzhou to spring and autumn period around 400 BC. It was originally constructed to transport military supplies when the Wu and Yue states were at war with one another. Running a length of 400 kilometers, that canal started in Suzhou, the capital city of Wu state, and ended in Shaoxing, the capital of Yue state. When the Grand Canal was formed in the Sui dynasty, its main function involved to carrying grain and other goods for royal use.
The region around Hangzhou is traditionally a production hub for grain and silk. Both of these products were strongly demanded by the court in the northern part of the country. Records show that over 5 million dun or 5,000 tons of grain were transported every year during the Song dynasty, together with countless other daily supplies. In addition, the canal also made people's journey from the north to the south easier and more comfortable. Among those taking advantage of this were Emperors Kangxi and Qianlong in the Qing dynasty, who traveled to Hangzhou by ship 11 times. In the 13th century, when the Italian explorer Marco Polo arrived in Hangzhou on the canal, he was overwhelmed and referred to the city as being, beyond dispute, the finest and noblest city in the world. The increasing exchange of merchandise and culture facilitated the development of the city.
The canal no doubt contributed to the booming economy of Hangzhou. During the Tang Dynasty 1,200 years ago, Hangzhou was one of the top 3 port cities in the country. When the Southern Song Dynasty made Hangzhou its capital city, the city had a population of 1.2 million and was one of the biggest in the world. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, a lot of state-run granaries were built on the canal's banks to store the grain before it was transported north. Back then, Hangzhou was known as the country's granary.
While most granaries vanished after the imperial transportation came to an end in the early 20th century, one was fortunate enough to have survived to tell the tales of the bygone era. The Fuyi Granary is a must-stop along the Grand Canal. It served as a transfer and storage hub of grains from both the vicinity and the south before they set off again to the imperial capital. Today, this magnificent structure no longer serves as a storage of grains, but is still very much part of today's life as a repository of culture and history. Covering an area of 6,000 square meters, ZHANG was able to accommodate up to 5,000 tons of grain in its heyday. When rediscovered a decade ago, ZHANG was no more than a dilapidated residential complex, but the architectural characteristics of the granary were still visible.
是按照粮仓的这个设计的，它也有很多的做法，比如说它的地板，它有架空层，这个就是为了通风。粮食它储存当中需要通风。
There is normally a 60-centimeter gap between the floor of the granary and the ground. The weather in Hangzhou can be very humid, and this method will keep the grain dry. The doors and windows of each room will always be closed to prevent rats running in. But in order to let air in, you can find small air holes made of bamboo near the roof.
专门有一个6-10公分的一个高度，用来就是用竹篾进行这个封护。
Now the local government is turning the historic site into a center of cultural recreation by setting up bookstores, tea houses, and art studios. The docks in Hangzhou bustled with people and life that made up an important part of the imperial grain transport. Today, strolling along these restored alleys right by the Grand Canal, you can still pick up traces of life as it were in the heydays of the Grand Canal. The surroundings along the Grand Canal might have changed again and again, yet generations of inhabitants of the Grand Canal continue to carry on with their traditional way of life. This neighborhood is called Xiaohe or a small river street, because a segment of the canal actually runs along its median line. Just like these preserved historic buildings, residents here enjoy a laid-back way of life, undisturbed by the tempo of modern society.
腌过、煮过，再晒干了。变梅菜，好不好吃？晒干以后变梅干菜，这该变梅干菜了。菜，
The ancestors of most residents here earned a living thanks to the canal. Mr. Yao Tongzhi's father was one of the successful businessmen in the area.
那我老爸原来是在临安，浙江临安。
My father was originally living in Lin'an, a county 45 kilometers away from Hangzhou. Lin'an was surrounded by mountains covered with a large amount of trees, so he sensed a business opportunity and started the timber trade by transporting wood along the canal to a factory located right here. Later, the original factory owner went bankrupt and my father bought the factory. It's a great location for the factory to be at the junction of the three rivers, so my father gradually expanded it to the largest one in the area in 1930s.
For Mr. Yao, a childhood spent beside the canal was full of fun, but was cut short by industrial development.
就是看得到底的。
When I was a little boy, the water of the canal was crystal clear as it originated in a mountain spring. I would often swim, catch fish and shrimps in the water with my friends. There used to be a lot of fish, and in half an hour I would catch enough for my family's dinner. But with more and more factories along the canal, the water became polluted and the smell was very bad.
一碗虾，1碗鱼肯定抓上来，真的，就手抓好了。
A major facelift project began in 2002 in order to preserve historic legacies along the canal. Houses were refurbished by the government while retaining their original structure and appearance. When the project was completed, most residents eagerly returned. For Mr. Yao, it meant returning to the house built by his father and to the trees he planted as a teenager. Our journey along the Grand Canal has just started. It is amazing how vibrant this ancient canal is still today. A sip of a good cup of coffee like this will put you right in the mood for some poetic reverie. A modern coffee house overlooking an ancient river, this contrasting image amazed Xu Yu, and the idea of opening a coffee house popped into her mind. Unlike Mr. Yao, Xu Yu is a new arrival to the banks of the canal and wants to bring something fresh as a writer and entrepreneur.
那很多人会想到，包括现在还有好多人说会把书语咖啡馆说成是书语茶馆。为什么？因为它太适合做。
When I rented a house, my friend said it's an ideal venue for a tea house. But I dropped that idea. One of the reasons was that I believe in a natural bond between writing and the coffee houses. Although I grew up by indulging in classical Chinese literature, I'm also a big fan of Proust and Balzac, who liked writing in coffee houses. Also, today's Hangzhou is an international city, and I think a coffee house can bring a more open vision to a relatively traditional corner of the city.
其实这是一种更加开放的，我觉得选择开咖啡馆，里面也可以喝茶，当然，它是一种更加开放的一种现代人的一种视野。其实我是这样想的。
At the coffee house, Xu Yu has been holding occasional literary salons. Friends and renowned authors from various parts of the world are frequent guests. Steeped in history and legends, the canal remains an important source of inspiration for the patrons of the coffee house.
我们现在是跟一座有2000岁以上的这样一个鲜活的流动。
It's wonderful to be so close to a river that is over 2,000 years old and still full of life. Sometimes when I'm gazing at water and the people walking on the bridge, I picture stories that may have taken place here a long time ago. Maybe someday I will write scripts against that backdrop.
Xu Yu is working on a new book slated for publication soon, aptly entitled Flow. It pays tribute to the different rivers she has encountered, including the canal. This is a river that shaped Hangzhou's past, but it won't cease to play a role in the city's future. With the city devoted to improving the water quality and the environment, this ancient waterway continues to play an intrinsic part of life. What's really wonderful about this place is that after thousands of years, this Grand Canal is still used as a valuable means of transportation for moving industrial goods and for moving people from point A to point B. And something that's really different today are these new lights created by a renowned German light designer. And it's a sign, certainly, that this Grand Canal is turning into a beacon of international tourism and world culture heritage.